Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Life After Debt podcast. First of all, I can't believe we're already in April, but I do have one of my favorite guests. I do have to say, I haven't had him on for a while, but I know everybody loves our conversations. So, welcome, Ryan Duncan, back to the podcast. I always love having you on here, and I know that our conversations are probably more organic than most because we have the pleasure of living together and eating together and doing life together. So our conversations are definitely a little more lighthearted, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me back. And I definitely consider it a privilege to come on your podcast and to spend time talking with you about things that matter and things that, yeah, things that come up in our conversation. Like that'd make a good podcast. But yes, I think that's a great way to find content. As I think all couples and all individuals have conversations that are really interesting, and then we have the privilege of being able to get behind a camera and talk about them. So thank you for having me. It's
Yeah, I'm honored. Most people don't have the pleasure of actually not only being married to someone, but also doing business with someone. And the way you and I, our brains think are very similar, but different. And so we are always ping ponging things back and forth or sharing ideas. And I know for myself, I've always learned so much from you when we met and you brought all your financial knowledge of just being a financial planner. And, I had no interest in learning those things prior to meeting you, but yet it seemed like once I met you and I was like absorbing it, I took it in this different direction a little bit and kind of like just wanted to know more, created challenges around it. And then to think that we created this business helping so many thousands of individuals escape credit card debt was
yeah,
probably at our peak, but it was also probably one of the most trying times. And so, I know right now too, like we've come off 3 weeks of traveling, which has been amazing. And I've just been sitting here thinking this morning, we talked a lot about this on the trip, but just kind of like the cycle of entrepreneurship and, the high highs that we go on together. But yet, like the older we get, I feel like we're entering this new season of what's important, right? And what
mhm.
we're chasing. So I don't know. I just want to expand on that because you brought it up on this trip and we talked about it a lot.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I remember the conversation that we had, and I think we were at a restaurant or something. But you know, I feel like I'm in a completely different mind space than I was in my 20s. And I think you concurred that, in my 20s, it's just, all right, what am I going to do to crush it? And then the 30s is about executing that plan. And there's this bell curve, of earning capacity, and it kind of peaks there in that, maybe 40-50 range. But it's interesting because there's another demand cycle that correlates with that, which is our consumption demand cycle. All the dreams we've ever wanted, all the cars I've ever wanted to drive, the houses I've wanted to buy, where have I wanted to live, the plane, the boats, and the travel. And so there's this rising demand cycle of consumption that it correlates with our earnings
Mhm.
cycle. And it's interesting because, thank God, and I do think it's like a divine design, that as I get older and I'm getting potentially out of my highest earning yield curve, that also my demand for consumption is going down. So, my earning curve is going down, but my demand for consumption is going down. And I just found that thought so intriguing. It was such a big idea to me that, it would really be tough if our demand for consumption, all those dreams, correlated with the latter part of our life where you didn't have any money,
Mhm.
because it's like what an empty feeling that would be. But yeah, I do feel like we're entering that different cycle of life. I think we're on the backside of that bell curve of demand for goods
Yeah.
and demand for things. And I
Mhm.
think that was the heart of the point, was it feels good to be over that hump. And yeah, that was the big idea, and that was kind of what was launched at that dinner.
Yeah, and most people when I talk to them, even the ones that are in debt, surprisingly, they're at a very high point in their life. They're just outliving what they're making. And so I think it's a normal cycle. Like you said, when you're making a lot of money and you're crushing it, especially as an entrepreneur, you just experience life to the fullest. Like
Mhm.
I used to tell you, it was like playing Monopoly, right? Like I
Mhm.
just felt like, oh my gosh, I can remember my first big splurge. Like I went and bought a Gucci purse and I was so excited about it. And it's funny because now it's like, yeah, I mean, a purse is great, but how many can you possibly have? The
Mhm.
thrill is no longer there. And it's like you get it out of your system in that first run up. And then now, as we're getting older, I mean, I just hit 50, which is absolutely crazy to think about, but to also see life so much differently than before, and that, like, honestly, simplicity is so attractive right now, and
Yeah.
just less things to manage,
Yeah.
less people to manage, less houses to take care of, less cars, even though I will always have my love for a couple great vehicles.
Mhm.
Still, less is so much more. And what
Yeah.
it's done for our peace of mind. You said something last night at dinner, which I have to bring up, which it's such a good
Definitely.
indicator of like the life that we live. But you're like, have you noticed how many less emails that are you getting less emails? Because I'm getting less emails. And I said, oh my gosh, I noticed the same thing. But it's in direct correlation to that bell curve. Like you said,
Mhm.
it's like when you're building, when you're in your 20s and 30s, which most entrepreneurs, when I was looking at a Harvard study, it says the 20s and 30s are like that grind period. And for you
Mm.
and I mean, we filed bankruptcy when we were what, 30,
30,
right? So we were 30 years
late
old,
30s.
filed bankruptcy, but yet we were like, no, sorry, this doesn't work for us. 10 years, we had built a multi-million dollar company helping others with credit card debt. Like,
Yeah.
that's just craziness to think
Mm.
about now. But when I talk about it out loud and think, we are almost 50, the thought of doing that again gives me anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I would have that in me again. Building an organization with hundreds of employees and multiple locations across multiple states. I don't know. I don't know that I would say we couldn't do it. I would say I don't know that it fits the lifestyle that
Mhm.
I believe is intended for us right now. And so there has to be a calibration between lifestyle desire and whatever I'm doing to walk in my purpose.
Mhm.
What am I going to build? I always say to you, every yes has consequences. And so what I've noticed is I've been guarding my yeses a lot more. And when I say yeses, that's a very broad open gate. It can be yeses to people, yeses to ideas from outside or in here. It can be yeses to what projects I'm going to be involved with. And I didn't used to be very careful of my yeses. I was very liberal with my yeses. And I think that email conversation is there's a direct correlation with
Mhm.
me guarding my yeses and the number of emails I have to wake up to every day. I mean,
Mhm.
I have like 450,000 emails in my inbox because I use it like a file cabinet. Nowadays, where I was getting maybe 1,000 emails a day or 500, whatever it was, I don't really know. It was a lot. And
Mhm.
combing through that, the amount of bandwidth that took mentally just to comb through, correspondence on projects and everything else. So, I yearn for something different now. I yearn for a simpler life with less things. And
Yeah.
I think I had that aha moment maybe about a year ago. I don't remember, but I shared it with you when I all of a sudden realized that the majority of my waking hours was spent managing possessions. And whether that was cars, boats, houses, um, you know, and all of the extraneous variables that go along with that, it was pretty much my life. I was
Mhm.
to the point where managing possessions was my life. And I'm like, this has got to stop, So I'm proud to say at this point in time, I don't even have a car. And I haven't had a car for like 3, 4 weeks now. And it's super, super weird, but it's also super liberating. I really like this shedding of stuff. And, there's a whole world out there that is about a minimalist lifestyle. And I know you've actually done some reading and read some books about it
Mhm.
because it's been so intriguing to us going from this consumption mentality and you got to have the biggest and best of everything, which,
Yeah.
we've walked through that and we
Mhm.
did do that. And I'm not ashamed of it. There was things I wanted to punch off my list, and
Yeah.
I know it was things you wanted to punch off your list that you wanted. But it's just kind of like a Solomon season
Mhm.
where it's like all the things doesn't fill the hole in your heart that's really reserved for your faith and
Mhm.
your family and your friendships. And those things are so much richer than all the toys. So we still like nice things,
We
but
still like nice things, but Ryan, to your point, and I think this is so well said. We were guilty and we were just as hustling as everybody else in the rat race. But,
mm,
about a year ago when that moment happened, and I can remember it vividly, like it was kind of like a wake up moment. Like, what is important to us? And why are we
mhm,
waking up every day with high blood pressure, with all because it's self induced, right?
yeah.
All the yeses that we said
I just had to
that
take a deep breath. Just think like
uh,
just
insanity.
feeling
It's
that weight
insanity.
again.
But how great it's felt, when we made that decision, like I closed Jackie down, really simplified in doing what a lot of successful entrepreneurs, when you look at Warren Buffett and you
Mhm,
look at Steve Jobs, one of the things that they said that Steve Jobs did, which I've always talked about this because I feel like our son Connor is very similar, but he wanted to limit the amount of decisions he had to make every day. So
yeah,
he purposely had like 20 of the same shirt, 20 of the same pants, all black in
mhm,
his closet. So it was one less decision he had to make. Now, I'm not looking for that necessarily because I really do like to get dressed,
mhm,
but I will tell you that there's something to be said about people who are high performing and keeping the decisions that you're making to a minimum
yeah,
every day
yeah,
and what it does for your overall health. And so Warren Buffett, that, when they talked with him, the guy's brilliant. He could have had anything he wanted, but he still lives in the same home he purchased like before he had nothing. The
mhm,
desire to accumulate things and more stuff was just not there for him. And so you
yeah,
look at his lifestyle and just the calmness when they talk with him. I believe there's a direct correlation. So now the question is, I know a lot of our listeners are people who they're in the hustle. They're in the
mhm,
grind, which is not a bad place to be, by the way. I'm not discounting it or discouraging it. I think
right,
everybody's got a little bit of hustle in them, and some people
yeah,
need to get a little hustle because,
yeah,
quite frankly, it's hard to watch. But
yeah,
how do you know? Like, how do you know when you are to the place to where it's like, all right, enough's enough. Now let's focus more about our lifestyle because I think some people are driven by money. I don't
mhm,
know that that's the case for us. I'm driven by making a difference. I think you too are driven by making a difference and leaving a legacy. That's what I know
mhm,
about you. Whereas some people are driven by the dollar. But for
mhm.
us, right now, I would say we're driven by our lifestyle. But how do you speak to those who have different driving motives?
Yeah, that's like the big life question, And so for me, I was driven by money for a long time. There's no doubt. In my teens, my 20s and my 30s, like I had goals and it all had a numeric value associated with it. And so that was my driving force. And it's really all I saw. I think in my face was really a different season completely. I started to understand that these arbitrary goals, monetary goals I set for myself were probably not divinely inspired. They were a number that were conjured from somewhere, some inspiration beyond maybe the right inspiration. And I started to think more in terms of purpose. I really, really believe every single person on the face of this earth was created and put here for a divine purpose. And my pastor recently helped me make a distinction between passion and purpose. And I don't really know that I'd ever made that distinction, that I can be passionate about something and it may not be my purpose on this earth. And I was like, oh, whoa, I didn't see that, and I had a project with my farm and, eating, and I was way ahead of the curve on the whole big pharma and the food trauma that we're all dealing with from the system, and developing the regenerative farm, launching a food brand that was super clean. I was super passionate. You remember, like, it
Oh, I
was my
remember your
world.
skin was glowing.
It was my world, and I was very passionate because I knew the message was so critical timing wise for the world.
Yes.
And but my pastor kind of challenged me that that may not actually be your purpose.
Mm.
That yes, it was a season where you were passionate about something. Maybe it was one of my purposes. So I think that to answer your question, the reconciliation that needs to be done is reconciling what our God-given purpose is. And that looks something like, what problem was I put on this earth to solve? And then and a lot of times that lies in our passion.
Yep.
So we're passionate about something and it's a problem that we see and we're waiting for someone else to solve it. Yet it's our problem to solve. And that there in that cocoon is our purpose.
Mhm.
So I do believe that, we're walking out our purposes in different ways now. And I think
Mhm.
that looks more like giving back.
Yeah.
There are people that are in seasons where their purposes are not in the giving back. They are still in the upward trend of the bell curve of their earnings curve.
Mhm.
And that is where they should be. And they should be thinking about how to drive revenue for their households to solve financial problems and then ultimately to sow seed back into others. And
Mhm.
so I'm not sure if that answered your question exactly, but that's really for me now. I'm focusing on purpose and I'm
Mhm.
focusing on I've detached myself from monetary gain being the only driving force in my life, which it was for a long time. I still have goals. I still have monetary goals. And most of those now are beyond my own consumption. Those are goals that actually live in the future when I'm not here.
Mhm.
And so that's where my legacy kicks in. My monetary goals now aren't about me and they're not about my next toy. They're actually how I'm going to build a legacy built foundation in our financial structure and the way we structure our estate and things of that nature. So purpose is completely different at 50 than it was
Mhm.
in mid. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense, and thank goodness, right? Because I don't think that we have the energy to put into what, our purpose was back then, and so it kind of like the bell curve with obtaining things, it's the same with your purpose, I believe, and it does
Mhm.
shift, it does change. I think you're able to get more dialed in. I know for myself, I've always loved helping people, so whether it was styling them at Jackie or helping them better their financial situation. That's what I love the most about being able to take everything that we've done in the last 15, 20 years and now inject it out and educate individuals who have no idea about finances. Because,
Mhm.
I think some people can look at our situation too. And it's so important to just revisit this, which is like we weren't born with silver spoons in our mouth. We were not handed anything. In fact, we started a company by taking the last $20,000 off our credit card, like
Mhm.
in the WIC line. It was a
Mhm.
true story. And so sometimes our stories just told to others just gives them a safe place to be like, okay, if she can do this and he can do this, because we were probably two of the most like, what are these two going to end up doing? They're either
Yeah.
going to be a complete bust, right? And but by the grace of God here we've made
Mhm.
it and now we're able to give back. And honestly, I think there's more joy in this season. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that I feel like I'm experiencing more than any amount of money that something could bring when you're walking in your purpose.
Mhm.
As Randy said, I think for me, what I'm experiencing is a joy that I never felt. It didn't matter how big the paycheck was. But
Mhm.
man, when I get a text, like I just got one this morning from someone I had done a business brainstorm with a couple weeks ago. And she just reached out to share with me of the success that she's had. She just purchased this business we had discussed. She's like so appreciative. And it's like, man, like, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
love seeing other people walk out their purpose because of a conversation they had with one of us because they felt inspired or they felt like, okay, well, if she says I can do it, I can do it. And a lot of
Yeah.
times that's all it takes.
Yeah.
So, it's I don't know, it's
Well,
joy is really the
you're
word that comes to mind.
you're the real deal, you know, and I wanna put this on the podcast because the truth is you grind and you know, I'm kind of a dreamer and I love to vision, but you're a grinder and like the person that you put yourself out to the public as is who you are. You know, behind closed doors, your nose is in your computer or your nose is in a book that is about something to help others. And you really put yourself out there and you put yourself out expertise out there. And I was just thinking about that this morning that, you know, how proud I am of you for the way you are constantly striving to be better and to be better at your craft. And you actually do the hard work. You roll up your sleeves and you do it. And I think that, you know, ultimately that's what it takes to be able to actually help people and to actually walk out your purpose. And so it doesn't surprise me you get those texts because you put your heart and soul into others' projects and you put your heart and soul into behind closed doors doing the hard work to improve yourself. So I just think that that's such a beautiful testimony for what we're ultimately here for. I
Mhm.
think what the ultimate God-given purpose ultimately is to help others, you know, serving others and helping people to live their best life. And so I just want to acknowledge you for what a great job you do at doing
Well,
that.
thank you. That was
Um,
sweet of you. I
yeah.
appreciate it.
And,
And, we're a
you know,
team. So that's the
well,
other thing is
yeah.
I know what you're saying, but I do, like, I appreciate the encouragement, and it's so important that, these couples that are working together, entering different seasons of life, like, being able to communicate openly about, because it could be that one partner is still in the grind phase where the other's like,
Mhm,
"Hey, like I'm entering a different season," but being able to
mhm,
communicate that the way that we have and kind of come together with our vision for what we want to accomplish in this decade, it looks different than the last. And so I think that's a real huge piece of the puzzle that I know you've been really great with orchestrating is that open dialogue and open
mhm.
conversation about where we are and where we're headed and what it looks like. And then, it's kind of like back in the business when you and Harry would say, here's what we need you to do, Amber, now go do it. And so like that's what I feel like I'm playing the
Yeah.
role even in this season with you and I.
Yeah, yeah, you're you know, you someone's gotta execute the vision, right?
Yeah.
And someone's gotta be the vision carrier.
Right.
Without vision, the people perish.
Mhm.
And so there has to be both. And the great news is that you don't have to be married to a vision carrier. You don't have to be married to the person who executes the strategy. There's a lot of people out there these days, a lot of technology that helps us to execute vision. And so you know, it is about continually learning because in this day and age, the last 20, 30 years, if you're not staying on top of the game of what is out there,
Mhm.
tools that are available to help execute the
That's
vision,
right.
then you fall behind. It's
Yeah.
not like it was 20 years ago. It's not even like it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It's changing so fast. So I think it's easy to get stuck where we once were in the way of how to build a business or the why to build a business. But times are changing. Things are not the same. You know, when I walk into a, where was it? So we were in a very fine dining restaurant in New York City at lunchtime. You know, we're at Lure in Soho, and the place is not cheap. And I'm just like, okay, want to split something? You know, that's the other thing. We split meals now. Talk about simplifying. We used to not only finish our own meals, we used to have three courses and finish it all. And now we're like, let's just share something. And as we're sitting there sharing something, I see all these different people walking in that you know, if you would have walked into a restaurant like Lure in Manhattan, Soho, 30, 40 years ago, the crowd would have been pretty homogenous.
Mhm.
And the eclectic nature of the people that were in there eating lunch blew my mind. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but the reality was it was 18-year-olds to, 60-year-olds, but mostly 18 to 30 that were not in business suits,
Yeah.
that all didn't have the same color hair. And I said to you, we had this group of kids. I call them kids. They were, late teens, early 20
I'm
young
sure
men.
influencers.
And they're eating like a $250, tower of seafood for lunch. And I'm sitting there looking around saying the game has changed.
Yeah.
And, you know, it is, we have to reimagine ourselves, and we have to continually be reimagining
Mhm.
ourselves, continually learning the tools that are out there for what? Out there to help you solve the problem and walk in your purpose.
Mhm.
And I think that's the key, is being able to really leverage what's available. I was didn't get it in a minute earlier in this call, but I think that one of the big deciding factors for me of this kind of shift in my thinking was that the older I get, time becomes more valuable than treasures. And I think that I was willing to lay down the battle axe of treasures and building this bigger and bigger treasure chest in lieu of having more time with the people I love and time to do the things that we love to do. And so, you know, really this whole bell curve timeline, it really is predicated and dictated a lot, I believe, by the type of lifestyle we want to lead.
Mhm.
And for me, I was just ready to lay down a lot of the stress. I know it's not good for my health, and it's definitely not good for my attitude. It's not good for my spiritual walk. So, you know, I gotta be careful. I gotta watch those things, or else life's not fun.
Yeah, and it does, you realize it, and that's one of the biggest things I've noticed also is just that my overall temperament after shedding the things and all the businesses and simplifying my life, just
Mhm.
like there's a sense of calm.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
isn't the high highs and the low lows, and there isn't the just chaos, as I would put it, or putting out
Mhm.
fires 24/7 to
24/7.
where you just feel
Mhm.
completely different. And maybe this is what people felt like all along. Maybe we're just the crazy entrepreneurs who try to juggle 17
Too
things,
much.
but
Try to
it
juggle
was.
too
It was
much.
definitely an eye opener. And hopefully, this conversation today will really resonate with some people that are either caught in the hustle or are entering a new season and they're struggling with it because it is a struggle at first. It's like, shouldn't I be doing something? Shouldn't I
Yeah.
be going in somewhere? But man, when you can really embrace the seasons where God takes you and
Mhm.
you really can just walk fully in it, what's been amazing to me, Ryan, is after you shed all the things, how when you commit your ways to the Lord and then you say, okay, like the doors just start opening up on where He's going to place you next, or what He wants you to volunteer in, or a group He wants you to be a part of and
Mhm.
pour into,
Yeah.
which to me is like, wow, isn't that just a testament of we can keep doing our thing?
Yeah.
Or we can actually surrender and be like, all right, well, I don't know what the season's going to bring, which I've loved this season, probably the most because we get to travel all the time. But just like
Yeah, me too.
it's been refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the big thing for me is, as it relates to that, the insanity of how many projects can I put in the project hopper. And I think there was a spirit of pride attached to that with you and I both, of how much we could handle and how much we could put on our plate. And the big thing, the big kind of idiom that comes to me is that just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Mhm.
And 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 there was a little bit of pride, like, well, look at how much I'm balancing. But was I really?
Right.
Were we really?
And
You
at what
know,
cost?
and was it a healthy balance? Like,
Mhm.
you know, if I can spin 15 plates in the air, but I'm a hot mess on the inside, well, I'm the picture of that duck that looks calm on the top of the water, but my feet under the surface are flapping at a million miles a minute, you know, then am I really managing it?
Yeah.
Am I handling it? If I'm great out there at the world, but the moment I get behind closed door at the house, I'm a raging Cajun. Like, am I managing it? Am I handling it? Is my life a success? And so some of those realizations of just because I can doesn't necessarily mean I should. I'm kind of a knucklehead and I'm stubborn, and I kind of have to learn by, sometimes, not always, thank God, by having to walk through it myself. Someone can tell me, and I'm like, okay, well, that was your truth, but maybe mine's different. You know, I've always had that kind of a mentality, but I'm at a place where I'm starting to say, yeah, these things are true. You know, that just because I can doesn't necessarily mean I should. That every yes matters. Every yes has downstream consequences. Every single yes has downstream consequences. And that goes for people that I let in my life, projects I let in my life, even decisions to go places, right? And every yes has down-term consequences. And so I try to pause and reflect and use the power of pausing and reflecting, have a Selah moment of, should this be a yes? Or is it just a, let's put it on hold? Or is it a no? And getting comfortable that no's are okay too. That's a whole different world for me. But I'm enjoying having a less complicated and stressful existence. I'm tired of. I'm excited to be walking away from managing possessions and everything else. So it's been a good season of
Yeah.
a lot of learning.
I totally agree. And I think probably as we close out, my takeaway tip that you gave me a while back that I actually put into practice right away. And it's been so beneficial. So I'm going to share it with our audience. But it was when you said, listen, you should just make a rule of thumb that you don't reply or respond making a big decision for 3 days. Like, give
Mhm.
it 3 days until you truly say a yes or no or whatever. Just really think it through. And so I started doing that right away. And one, I actually tell the people, anybody that I'm, thinking about or talking to, and they ask something of me, I always say, you know what? I have a rule of thumb. I won't make a decision for 3 days. So I just want to think it over and make sure because our nature, I know mine, was always, I'm all in. Like, I'm not going to miss an
Mhm.
opportunity. So now taking those 3 days to really make sure it's the best yes towards what it is they're asking has been amazing. But what's been interesting is how many people have responded back and said, man, that is a great rule. Like, I think I'm
Mhm.
going to start implementing that. And so it gives
Yeah.
everybody permission to pause rather
Yeah.
than jump in without thinking through the decisions and the long-term effect it's one, most
Yeah.
importantly, going to have on you, your personal
Yeah.
health and well-being.
Right. No, it's in that space that we create. What's biblical.
Mhm.
If we're looking to derive wisdom from a source, then we have to create space for that wisdom to percolate and to manifest and be able to happen.
Yeah.
Whether that is through a word from the Lord, or whether it's through some wisdom from another person. So during that 3 days, I have an opportunity to call 1 to 3 people and run an idea past them, especially if they're people that have been there, done that. And the third thing is, and this just happened to me recently, I had an investment opportunity and someone was looking to borrow money, and on paper, it looked great. It was a great yield, and I'm backed by real estate. And, but I'm like, yeah, I'll give it a few days. And by day 2.5, the opportunity went away.
That's awesome.
It was like, hey, you know what? This borrower decided to do something else and not take this loan. I was like, great, that's great, And I just think of what the yes would have been if I would have gone after that. Maybe it wasn't meant for me. Maybe it wasn't what was best for the borrower, which that was the case. It didn't end up being the best thing to take this loan. And so in that space that we can create
Yeah.
for the supernatural to happen,
Mhm.
in my natural, I can block the supernatural impact that God wants to give. That is a core operating tenet of my life now that really helps me in the simplification, guarding my yeses. Just because I can doesn't mean I should. All
That's
these
right.
little things that's a great tool
Mhm.
to actually, because it's one thing to like throw out these idioms, these little sound bites. It's another thing to give people a tool to put in their
Yeah,
tool bag to help
that's
them
right.
actually do it.
Right.
I'm the type of guy, it's like, great, that's great. That sounds really good. Give me a tool. I
Yeah.
need a tool because left to my own devices, I will blow, I will blow even the wisdom I have about something if I don't have a tool. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's good also for spending, also for splurging, also that 3-day rule. If people practice that, I know I'm using it a lot now, and I would encourage everyone to just,
Mm.
it's there. So it's always good to have those little tidbits. So thanks for sharing that
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah. No, it's
All right. Well, it was so great. You are my favorite guest as always. So thank you for coming on today and taking time out of your schedule to be a part of the podcast. And I know we'll do it again soon.
all right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.